History often remembers wars that redefined continents. The War of 1812, fought between the young United States and the mighty British Empire, rarely makes the list. Yet this conflict was pivotal. It shaped national identities, tested alliances, and set the stage for North American geopolitics for generations. To understand the war, we must step back to a world still dominated by the echoes of Napoleon's Europe. Britain had spent decades fighting France, building an empire at sea. Meanwhile, the United States, barely 3 decades old, was navigating its place in a world dominated by powers far larger and more experienced. At home, Americans faced constant harassment at sea. British ships stopped American vessels, seized sailors, and violated neutrality rights. On the frontier, native confederacies resisted American expansion, sometimes supported by British arms. Congress debated heatedly, and young politicians, called the war hawks, pushed for a show of strength. The War of 1812 was more than a border skirmish. It was a test. Could the fledgling United States survive as a sovereign nation, or would it be crushed by global powers while its neighbors watched? By 1810, the Atlantic was a battlefield. British naval impressment forced thousands of American sailors into service, often tearing families apart. Trade restrictions imposed by Britain and France choked commerce, sparking economic resentment. In the West, native confederacies, led by Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa, the Prophet, sought to defend their homelands against settlers. They found allies in the British, who supplied weapons and supplies to resist American expansion. The Americans, fearful of a new native-British alliance, saw war as inevitable. The war hawks, including Henry Clay of Kentucky and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, saw opportunity. They argued that British control of Canada was a threat to national honor, and that expansion into North America could solve frontier conflicts. Newspapers inflamed public opinion, portraying the British as arrogant, cruel, and determined to humiliate the United States. By 1812, a fragile peace had crumbled. Diplomacy had failed. The question was no longer whether the U.S. should fight, it was how.
On June 18, 1812, President James Madison signed the Declaration of War. Some Americans celebrated, viewing it as a second revolution, a chance to assert independence once and for all. Others, especially in New England, opposed it, fearing economic disaster and military humiliation. The United States had just 7,000 regular troops and a handful of small, underfunded militias. In contrast, Britain commanded a global empire and a professional army experienced in Napoleonic warfare. Yet Americans believed in their cause, their resolve fueled by the memory of past triumphs over Britain. Across the Atlantic, Britain treated the conflict as a minor nuisance. Its focus remained on Europe. This apparent underestimation would give the U.S. initial confidence, though the reality on the battlefield would quickly prove more complicated. The early campaigns into Canada were ambitious but poorly coordinated. The Americans hoped to capture key British positions, but logistical problems, inexperienced troops, and local resistance led to failure. The Battle of Queenston Heights in October 1812 was pivotal. British forces, led by General Isaac Brock, defeated the Americans and killed Brock in the process. His death became a symbol of Canadian resilience, rallying Loyalist forces. Meanwhile, other invasions faltered at Fort Detroit and along the Niagara frontier. Soldiers suffered from supply shortages, harsh winters, and disease. The failures were a harsh lesson. This war would not be won by enthusiasm alone. Seas become a battlefield. If the land campaigns faltered, the sea offered hope. The U.S. Navy, though small, struck fear into the Royal Navy. The USS Constitution, a 44-gun frigate nicknamed Old Ironsides, defeated HMS Guerriere in 1812, a victory that stunned the world. Other engagements, such as the battles of Lake Erie and Lake Champlain, were crucial. Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry declared, "We have met the enemy, and they are ours," after a decisive victory on Lake Erie. These wins were more than tactical. They restored national pride and demonstrated that Americans could fight and win against the greatest navy in the world. In 1814, the war reached its dramatic climax in the South. British forces attacked along the Gulf Coast and the Chesapeake Bay. On August 24, they entered Washington, D.C., setting fire to the Capitol, the White House, and other government buildings. The destruction was symbolic. The heart of American government seemed vulnerable, yet resilience emerged. In Baltimore, defenders held firm at Fort McHenry, inspiring Francis Scott Key to write the poem that would become the Star-Spangled Banner. Meanwhile, the Battle of New Orleans in January 1815, led by Andrew Jackson, became legendary. Though it occurred after the peace treaty was signed, it was a dramatic American victory that cemented Jackson's reputation and symbolized American determination. Native nations played a central role in the war. Tecumseh, a visionary leader, sought to unite tribes across the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes to resist American expansion. Allying with Britain, he became a formidable opponent. The Battle of the Thames in 1813 was a turning point. Tecumseh was killed and the Confederacy fractured. Native resistance in the region weakened, leaving communities vulnerable to future American expansion. Their struggle highlighted a tragic reality. Even in alliance with a global power, Native nations faced overwhelming odds. Their contributions and sacrifices remain a critical part of the War of 1812's story. After years of bloodshed, both sides sought peace. Negotiations in Ghent, Belgium culminated in the Treaty of Ghent, signed on December 24, 1814. The treaty essentially restored pre-war boundaries, with no territorial gains for either side. Yet the treaty was significant. It recognized U.S. sovereignty, encouraged reconciliation, and established diplomatic precedent. Though battles had raged across North America, diplomacy ultimately defined the war's conclusion. The War of 1812 tested courage, strategy, and resilience. It was a crucible for a young nation, shaping political and cultural identity. Although often forgotten, the War of 1812 echoes through history. It defined national borders, inspired anthems, and created heroes remembered centuries later. It reminds us that independence is fragile, alliances are complex, and leadership can make the difference between victory and disaster. From naval duels to burning capitals, from frontier battles to diplomatic negotiations, the War of 1812 shaped the modern North America we know today. Its lessons about honor, strategy, and resilience remain timeless. If you enjoyed this video and are still not subscribed, please consider it, as it really helps me out a lot. Thank you.